keeping focus and really understanding when to get in and when to get out, when to go long-term charters, when to go short, stay spot.
What do you think are, the future proof of success?
Should we say that strategic culture? I have 9 factors that I think are important. If you are an investor and you become emotionally attached to your assets, you're probably in.
It was incredible to finally have you on the phone. I'm very excited to be joined by Peter. And Peter, thank you so much for taking the time. Just start with the recent news about the Lorange network, because obviously you have been building this great organization and it looks like you made a very important deal just recently. Can you quickly explain the concept of the network and what happened?
Yeah. What happened is that I started the Lorange network roughly 3.5 years ago. And, the idea was to try to have various webcasts discussing critical investment issues, focusing particularly on family business, family-owned businesses, independent investors, family-owned businesses. And again, the network is the web-based network is still small. It's only 3,500 members, but these are people that I want to have there. So the aim is not to make this a huge network, but to have it high quality network. So I kind of came to realize, I'm now 78, that perhaps it would be time to let somebody else take over. And for a while I thought maybe that might be my family, my son-in-law. But the more I thought about it, and I spoke with members of the network, the more I realized that they were interested in my views. And if not my views, they were interested in reputable organizations such as IMD, where you have a group of, say, 70 professors who are all, most of them at least, are more or less cutting edge. And so I initially thought that maybe I would sell this network to, say, a bank or somebody like that. But I got quite a lot of resistance from the members when it came to that. They said, we are not here to be members of the network and then you simply turn around and then kind of cash in on us. So I ended up selling it for a much lesser price than I elsewise would. It was emotionally kind of hard to in a sense give it up. I spent quite a lot of time and energy to build this up, and I'm in good health and all of that. But still, being 78, I have to realize that things are probably coming to an end within not too long, so to speak.
Very interesting. If we can just talk at network as a broad concept, I mean, it's been a buzzword, I don't know for how many years, right? You need to be good at networking, you need a good network, etc. But given your life experience, etc., can you just paint the picture of how important it is to be mindful of the network you're building, especially if you're an entrepreneur or an academic person or a business person? How important is it to have focus on your network, right?
Well, I think you could look at that from various angles. If you think about it in terms of all type organizations, it's businesses or even business schools, whatever, you could take University of Tromsø, whatever. The problem with those places is that they are full of expensive buildings, and they are the oodles of very expensive professors and assistants and secretaries, what have you. So the costs of running these places are enormous. So if you take, for instance, the Lorange Institute, which I built up and subsequently sold to the Chinese, I was able to provide top quality educational services by asking the professors to come in when I wanted them. And I was able to, should we say, let people learn via the web, like we are working on now, and not necessarily sit in expensive classrooms that were used maybe 3 or 4 times per week, or maybe 3 or 4 hours per day at the best. So I was able to demonstrate to myself that, through networking, as opposed to classical hierarchical stuff, I could dramatically reduce the costs. And of course, that's what I then did once more with building up the Lorange network, which is in a sense a modern version of a business school. But it costs a fraction. But the reason I'm able to do that is through networking, contacts, etc. And that brings me to, should we say, the philosophy of a networker. I think it has a lot to do with listening and mutual respect, as opposed to command and control. So it means that people are willing to work with you because you listen to them and you respect them. I know that you interviewed a good friend of mine, Morten Astrup, and he understands, after I told him that, not good, after we discussed, that it's a matter of respecting and working with the best based on that. But networking is, in a sense, being able to link up with the best, listening to them, treating them with respect, and in that sense, let the network grow. And then you also have the benefits, not only of the quality of the stuff being better, but also that the costs are under control.
Can we, since we mentioned higher education, can we just immediately address the elephant in the room? So if you look at the higher education price index in US, so I studied at UC Berkeley for a brief period, and exactly to your point, there are expensive buildings to be maintained, right? And they're pretty from the outside, but once you get in them, it's like, okay, fine, right? The chairs aren't that good, but it looks good from the outside. How do we solve this price index, which is terrible for the next generation who needs to take great loans in order to have a couple of classes at the campus, right? It doesn't seem right, at least.
No, I fully agree with you. And in a sense, I'm perhaps not the right person to talk about that, but since I have been heading up several of these places in Norway, for instance, BE, and in Switzerland, IMD, and both of them are full of buildings and professors by, should we say, embracing the modern reality, which is computers, computer-based networks. And you and I are talking together now. Why couldn't this be the way we learn? And I do think that maybe some blended learning is the future, that there is a room for sitting down, face-to-face listening, interacting, but that would mean that the schools are no longer run as, should we say, lecture places, but as long weekend seminars where you have small groups of people sitting together in flat rooms as opposed to the sleeping dormitoriums, which are, with reclining walls, reclining roofs, floors, and where you sit and sleep and all of that. But where you sit down around the round tables and listen to everybody else in the best sense of networking, and where the professor is more of a, should we say, a conductor and somebody who also learns, rather than somebody who rattles off some piece of nonsense that he or she has done for 20 years and there's nothing new in it. Learning is a matter of, should we say, experiencing. It's a matter of interaction. It's a matter of testing out how others in the network react to what you say, things like that. And so I think that if you believe in that, you can then have physical learning activities over the weekends, coupled with stringent learning via the web during the week. And you can learn very, very well, perhaps even better than in the past, while you keep your full-time job. And that's, I think, the future.
Isn't one of the problems that higher education is almost like a monopoly and too good of a business to stop?
Well, it's worse than that, if you ask me. You are in Tromsø now, you told me, just walk over and talk with the professors, Oh, it's so important what they do, research and this and that. By the way, the professors, they are so busy doing research that they cannot even teach. Obviously, teaching and research go together in a healthy networked reality. But these people are on cloud nine. They are paid by the government, the taxpayers, the socialistic taxpayers, to the socialistic regime, with the Norwegian taxpayers backing them, and they are very happy keeping things the way it is. The fact is, so, and you know very well, that if you take the rankings of higher education, the institutions of higher education, not that the rankings are the panacea to everything, but you can still not avoid saying that the Norwegian higher education institutions have been on the slide. If you go some 70, 80 years ago, Norges Tekniske Høgskole in Trondheim was one of the best in Europe. Today, they're not even ranked. By the way, they are now part of a mediocre university in Trondheim, which the socialist Gudmund Hernes organized. And if you take Norges Handelshøyskole, where I studied, it's on cloud nine. The professors there have a good time doing esoteric research. Nobody else benefits from this. This is just an expensive exercise leading to nonsense results. And it's, again, the quality of it all is getting worse and worse. In my opinion, if you look at the top-notch places today, I mean, let me just rattle off a few. Like here in Switzerland, you have Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule and its sister organization, EPFL in Lausanne. They are ranked among the top 5 or 6 in Europe in technical universities, and maybe in the world. And if you take IMD, I'm saying I used to be head of that for 15 years. We were ranked among the 4 or 5 best business schools in the world. If you take MIT or Wharton or Harvard, I've been associated with all 3, you see that the professors are very much part of this real world. They're working on the real problems. Their research and the teaching go hand in hand. These are not people who are, should we say, too important to teach. On the contrary, they see these as, should we say, network activities that you cannot cut off parts of it and think that you are more relevant by only doing esoteric research. So if you look at these top institutions, which are, should we keep Division 1 rankings, they are very different than what you typically find in, as far as I can understand, in the Norwegian institutions of higher education.
Let's be very practical. So if you're listening to this conversation and are in your 20s, or if you have a child who is in that age, what's the best advice in terms of higher education? And I think it's very important to separate doctors, lawyers, where you need to have sort of like a law or a sort of like teaching. You have to be in school in order to have your profession or be able to do it. Let's separate that from the business world, right? Because in business, you can pretty much do whatever you want if you're driven, smart, and talented, right?
Yeah, well, let's stick to business education. And as you know, you have, when I was growing up and I got a reasonably good examen artium, I basically had three choices. I could be a medical doctor, and if so, I would study at University of Oslo, the Faculty of Medicine, or I could go to the technical university in Trondheim, or I could go to Norges Handelshøyskole. If I'd went anywhere else, I would have, in a sense, wasted my good artium. So it was very much a reputation-driven reality. I happened to end up at NHH, the Norwegian School of Economics and Business. And in a sense, at that time, if you studied there and graduated from there, the difficult thing was to get in, by the way, not to get through. And then you were guaranteed a job for the rest of your life. I think reality today is very different. Today, it's a matter of really trying to learn, and to learn to become smarter. And in a sense, the reputational part of learning, of picking places which have high reputation, is no longer so critical, at least at the undergraduate level. I understand that if you go for an MBA or a doctorate or something, it may make a difference. And then you're better off going to the IMDs or the Harvard Business School or things like that. You mentioned Berkeley. But undergraduate, I think it's a matter of trying to learn in a way that you become smarter. And I think this blended learning that we discussed has a lot of potential for that.
I couldn't agree more. And what I really like about your career is that you're obviously a proven academic and professor, but you're also a business person and an art collector. But is it okay for you to spend maybe 5 minutes on shipping because you have a great story on shipping and you're passionate about it? Can you explain the story on how you got involved in a specific company and how you turned it around and made a profit of it? Because we have many listeners who really love shipping.
Well, thank you. No, listen, I have, people have been working on shipping issues in my family for several generations, so I've been involved in that. I took over a small shipping company from a cousin of my mother, Mr. Sam Ugelstad. At that time, when I took over S. Ugelstad Skipsrederi, there were 2 small ships in the company, supply ships, and a bundle of debts. So de facto, I took over half a ship. So what I then did was to spend 5 years buying out the other shareholders. I took over roughly 50% of the company from the previous owner, and then I bought out the others over the next 5 years while the asset value was still low, and then I built it up. And of course, shipping, as far as I can understand, is all about timing. So I bought the ships secondhand, mostly when the market was down, and then others sold, I bought, and then I sold it at top. So when I sold the shipping company, it was quite big. I think we had 10, 15 ships. And again, I was very focused, by the way. I was strictly in the offshore supply ship area. I stayed away from, I did some diversification and lost a lot of money on that. Bulk carriers, tankers, chemicals, reefers, which have since gone out. But the point is keeping focus and really understanding when to get in and when to get out, when to go long-term charters, when to go short, stay spot. These were some fairly simple rules that I followed. A lot of money resulted. Obviously, when I sold it, it was emotionally quite dramatic. But you know, if you are an investor and you become emotionally detached to your assets, you're probably in shit creek. You have to always be willing to sell to should we say, cash in. I was equally emotionally slightly distressed when I sold the Lorange Institute to the Chinese. But in retrospect, thanks God, I did it. And that's the way it is. But when you sell things, in my opinion, never sell your name. So I've always kept my name, Lorange, or the Ugelstad name. My investment company now is SU Ugelstad Invest. Cannot be traced back to me, which I also think is good, by the way. I am very glad that I'm not figuring in any of these ridiculous lists of the monthly magazine Capital, for instance. I have no interest in that. So stay neutral, stay below the radar, and it's bad that I'm talking to you now, by the way, but normally I don't do that.
It's an excellent point, and I'm sorry for exposing you, but let's talk about, you talked about timing, and we can use shipping as an analogy because it's fascinating that you can have the right knowledge, but if you have the wrong timing, it doesn't really matter. You will lose a lot of money. So how do you look at those concepts where you have luck and skill and how they need to act together and be perfectly matched in order to get the return on the investment or your time even?
Well, for me, it's fairly simple. I mean, I have observed over a long life that most businesses tend to have cycles. Real estate, banking, stocks, do you take it? There are cycles everywhere. And thanks God, that's good. That means you can make money. And that means in, out, long, short, it's all that matters. You get in when the cycles are on the low side, you get out when cycles are on the upper side. But then we come back to your question. You don't ever try to hit the very top of the cycle. You get out when you feel you've done a reasonable deal. And don't be greedy. A friend of mine told me that the market can take bulls and bears, but it cannot take pigs. So be happy with a little bit of profit. You could sit it out perhaps and make more profit, but then it's very easy to go over the top and you are falling very steeply into the valley. So that's not good.
It's an excellent point.
So in other words, I think that one of the worst things that can happen to many of us is we are too greedy. Now let me just add on a little bit. If you take most areas, you go in, make a commitment, make an investment. Obviously, that investment, not obviously, but if you can, that investment should be of a certain size if you believe in it. Then when the should we say, things hopefully go up, then you sell some of it and keep the rest, which is paid for already, and you have a ride for free. Then you can, of course, afford to speculate a little bit more as to when you get out, because the investment has already been paid for. And also, by the way, many of us, certainly me, make bad mistakes in terms of not to go up at all, but it just goes further down. Then get out immediately. Jump ship. Don't sit and wait. Take a small loss and don't lose sleep over that.
I think the concept of greed is very important because obviously you've written several books, or I mean, several is an understatement, but also books and papers, etc. But there is clear research that, happiness isn't necessarily linked to the next million you make, right? No. And given that you are in your position, can you also just clarify that hypothesis that people need to know that extra million doesn't mean that you get happier necessarily, at least?
Well, I really don't have. I'm not a theologist, or I'm not a occupational psychologist dealing with things like that. But for me, at least, I think happiness seems to have to do with diversity. I'm happy because I am partly doing research. I have written more than 30 books and more than 150 articles in my life. I'm happy doing that. And I'm happy doing my investments. And I'm happy doing art collection. So I think it's a combination of those things that makes sense to me and makes me happy. But of course, I'm not necessarily happy making a good buck when I'm investing, but it's a sense of, should we say, feeling that you are able to do things, which makes me happy. And that is the same feeling I have when I'm collecting art. I'm able to do it. I am able to spot what I see as good art, and it turns out to be good choices, most of it. You can see it somewhere in my back here. And it's certainly been a good business, that too.
This is great, by the way. The stories are spectacular. So, I mean, just before we go on, like the feedback I'm getting from the viewers is that they love, the personal reflections tied with academic perspective. And I think you have a great balance in doing both at the same time.
Well, I happen to believe that this is very important. And I have to say that in my network of people that I run into, I've seen very few that are both relatively okay academically and relatively okay business-wise. And in that sense, in all modesty, I may be quite unique in that sense. And I think, to me, that has been a major factor. I mean, my ability to do business has improved because of my academic inklings, and vice versa. I could never, I think, have had a chance to kind of do good academic work if I didn't have the background in business. So this is a positive reality, in stark contrast to isolating oneself as an academician in an ivory tower and just neglecting the reality around. Now, that brings us to leadership. I think that in the Nordic areas, Norway, perhaps more than anything, this kind of bottom-up thinking is that, you lead by involving the organization. The issue of who's at the top is less important. If you contrast that with what you see, say, many hierarchical countries, the US, for instance, you see quite heavy leadership from the top, the head of General Electric, head of General Motors, bang, 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 their word is a law. But again, as you see, neither Norwegian business nor these old US firms have done particularly well. In fact, you've obviously seen that GM and GE are bankrupt or reorganized, and the winners now are the Amazon.coms, etc., etc. So what I think is leadership now is to understand how to blend top down and bottom up in a good way. And to me, a good example of that would be, for instance, Nestle here in Switzerland, where you have clearly a person at the top, Mark Schneider. At the same time, Nestle is worldwide, and the people from China, people from the US, people from Argentina, they have access to the leadership cabal of Nestle in a bottom-up sense. So you have, in a sense, a regional voice in all of this, which makes this blend a reality. You see the people from the regions blending up with the people from the center, and that becomes it. So this is in stark contrast to, should we say, a Norwegian culture. you have the local culture from the bottom ups, blending with the headquarter culture from where the company happens to be domiciled, the headquarter is. So it's very, very difficult to. I used to be fairly centrally involved in Norsk Hydro before it was split up. The problem was that Norsk Hydro was kind of a Norwegian culture worldwide. What we needed was local cultures blending with the Oslo culture, local cultures blending with the headquarter culture. And to find that ability to, should we say, respect the local cultures while still recognizing that you need a top-down culture. You need a boss, a good boss after all, but it needs to be a network-oriented boss rather than a, should we say, dictatorial boss. That blend that's modern leadership right now.
I couldn't agree more. And just a final question, Peter. So if we forecast ahead, or if we look ahead, what is a future proven strategy for organizations, businesses? Because obviously you touched upon it that you need great leadership, but I mean, you work so much with research and your job is also to try to look into the future. What do you think are, the future proof of success?
Well, that's a key question. And I mean, I've spent quite a lot of my life working on various types of strategic models and things like that. I have unfortunately come to the conclusion that much of that classical, should we say, strategic dogmas is not relevant. You have a SWOT analysis, you have market share, you have Porter's 5 forces, and God knows what you have or not. It's probably not all that relevant. You have strategic planning focusing on that. You could plan till you're green in your head and you still are not making business. I think to develop, should we say, in contrast, should we say, a strategic culture is much more important. And I'm just in the process of finishing a book on that, which is coming out. It's done. It's being edited right now. I have 9 factors that I think are particularly important. And I don't want to rattle on all of those, but things like, speed, ability to deal with risks, ability to get in, out, long, short, cycle management, ability to network, ability to be, should we say, honest, ability to not be too greedy, things like that, I think are much more fundamental in developing a, should we say, a healthy strategic culture than these dogma that we have been grappling with in much of business and much of academia for the last 50 years.
For people who want to learn more about your work, what's the best place to start? Is it to read your first book, your last book, your articles? Where do you send people who are listening right now and want to learn about this?
You will not like my answer to that, but I've written more than 30 books. I find them rather boring, and I don't look at them again. But for me, it's much more important to all the time ask, where am I now and what am I looking forward to do? To look in the back mirror means very little to me. So if I were you or you readers or you listeners, I guess, I would look for this new book that's coming out a few months from now. Another book that you may be interested in is one that came out was published by IMD, of all things, a few months ago, which has to do with new views on strategies for family businesses. I believe more and more, Christopher, that family business is more and more important. It allows you to think more long-term, be more detached from the whimsies of the stock market, quarterly earnings, etc. You don't need to worry so much about that. So good strategies, I think, increasingly have to do with non-public companies. So you see that with Amazon.com and et cetera, also.
It's a perfect ending, Peter. Thank you so much for joining. It was incredible to finally have you on the phone. If you like this episode and the content we create, please make sure to check out our newsletter called the Byn Letter. More information is in the show notes.